12-year-old Ethan Miller walked into Metropolitan Federal Bank in downtown Chicago with nothing but a worn backpack and one simple request: I just want to check my balance. Moments later, the room fell silent as the screen revealed a fortune he never knew existed, one that made him a major shareholder in companies controlled by billionaire Henry Whitmore. And in that instant, Ethan went from invisible kid in South Side to the biggest threat to one of Chicago's most powerful men. Ethan Miller had never been inside a place that looked so polished, so bright, or so far removed from the world he knew. The marble floors of Metropolitan Federal Bank reflected everything like they were trying to make people feel smaller. And in Ethan's case, it worked. He tugged the fraying strap of his backpack a little higher onto his shoulder, trying to look confident even though his palms were sweating and his heartbeat felt loud enough to echo through the lobby. He wasn't sure what he expected when he stepped through the revolving glass doors that morning. But it definitely wasn't the feeling of walking into a place built for people who didn't have to count their dollars before buying groceries. Ethan had gotten used to stretching every coin, every coupon, every side hustle. Now here he was, standing under chandeliers that probably cost more than everything inside his home. The receptionist barely glanced up before giving him that polite, but not really polite smile reserved for kids who wandered somewhere they allegedly didn't belong. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to ignore the stares from businessmen in crisp suits and women wearing shoes that clicked confidently across the floor. He'd never owned anything that clicked. His sneakers barely squeaked. Still, he walked up to the counter because he had come for a reason, and he had promised himself he wouldn't chicken out. Thomas Green had trusted him with the envelope, with the account number, with the message that it was time for Ethan to know the truth about his grandfather. And even if Ethan didn't fully understand what that meant, he wasn't going to run away from it. The teller, a woman with flawless hair and a name tag that read Mims. Brooks looked down at Ethan as though surprised he was addressing her. He cleared his throat, wishing he didn't sound as nervous as he felt. "Ma'am," he said, polite the way Grandma Rose had taught him. "I need to check the balance of a bank account." He set the yellowed envelope on the counter like it was something fragile, something important, something he wasn't supposed to mess up. "Mez." Brooks raised an eyebrow, her expression softening just barely. "Your account?" Ethan hesitated. "It belonged to my grandfather, I think. I was told I should come here." Her fingers paused over her keyboard, and she studied him differently now, not warmly, not kindly. Just measuring, the way people in the South Side were measured all the time. She asked for his documents. Ethan handed them over carefully, the pages worn but organized: birth certificate, his grandfather's old identification paperwork. Mither. Green had helped him gather, things Ethan didn't understand but trusted. Before she could type anything further, a loud burst of laughter boomed through the lobby. The kind of laugh that demanded attention, demanded space, demanded acknowledgement. People turned instantly, as if responding to a command issued without words. Ethan didn't have to look to know whoever entered was someone important. Someone used to being treated like royalty in places like this. Ms. Brooks straightened, her professional mask tightening. "Good morning, Mir." "Whitmore," she called out automatically. Ethan turned. Henry Whitmore, billionaire, philanthropist, television darling, and the man whose face appeared on Chicago magazines at least twice a year, strode into the bank as if he owned the entire building. Maybe he did. His suit looked tailored enough to make anyone feel underdressed, and two assistants trailed behind him, laughing dutifully at something he said. Ethan had seen Whitmore's face on billboards and business reports shown on TV at the laundromat, but in person the man seemed larger than life and also somehow colder. Whitmore walked directly toward the center counter, bypassing the line entirely because people like him didn't wait. People like him didn't have to, and no one dared say otherwise, not even the man whose expression soared slightly when Whitmore cut in front of him. Ethan felt the weight of 100 unspoken rules in this place, rules he didn't know how to follow. Then Whitmore's attention drifted to Ethan. He paused, studied him. A smirk tugged at his lips, like discovering a child in the bank was the setup to a joke only he understood. "What do we have here?" Whitmore said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Field trip day at the bank." A few customers chuckled. The way people laughed when they didn't actually think something was funny but didn't want to upset the powerful man in the room. Ethan felt his neck heat up, but he forced himself to stay steady. "I'm doing a transaction, sir." Whitmore laughed again, amused in a way that felt sharp. "A transaction? And what exactly does a kid like you need from a bank like this?" Ethan opened his mouth, unsure how to answer, but Ms. Brooks cut in. "He's here with proper documentation." "Documentation for what?" "A piggy bank deposit." Whitmore waved a dismissive hand, leaning closer to glance at the envelope. "Let me guess. Someone told you there's treasure in there." His tone was mocking, theatrical, the way someone poked fun at a stray dog wandering into the wrong yard. Ethan gripped the counter tighter, fighting the instinct to shrink. "I just want to check the balance," he said, forcing his voice to stay firm. The assistants laughed again, echoing Whitmore's amusement as if their jobs depended on it. Maybe they did. Whitmore reached out and picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate him. He slid out the papers, scanned them, and chuckled. "These account numbers are ancient. Whoever gave this to you is messing with you, kid. These kinds of accounts don't hold anything but dust." He dropped the envelope back onto the counter like garbage. Ethan took a breath, steadying the frustration tightening his chest. He'd dealt with condescending adults before. Teachers who underestimated him. Cashiers who looked past him. Strangers who assumed he was trouble because of where he lived. But something about Whitmore's arrogance stirred something deeper, something closer to defiance. "I'd still like to check," Ethan said again, and this time the firmness in his voice surprised even him. "Mies." Brooks exchanged an uncertain glance with Whitmore, who scoffed. "Fine, let's humor the boy. I could use a good laugh today." She hesitated but finally entered the numbers into the system. Her keystrokes echoed across the spotless counters. Ethan tried not to look nervous. He tried not to picture Green's face when he gave him the envelope. The way the old man's hands trembled with something that wasn't fear, something more like hope. Then Ms. Brooks froze, her shoulders locked, her hand hovered over the mouse. Her breath caught in a small, sharp inhale. Whitmore leaned in eagerly. "Well, how many pennies does our young entrepreneur have?" Ms. Brooks didn't answer. She stood, walked briskly to Director Collins' office, and returned with the man himself. Collins typed something into the system, checked the documents, checked the computer again, and then straightened slowly, looking at Ethan with an expression that didn't match the way everyone had looked at him moments earlier. Respect wasn't the right word, it was something heavier. "Ethan," Collins said carefully, "this account is active, very active, and substantial." Whitmore's smirk faltered. "Substantial how?" Collins adjusted his tie. "Multi-million-dollar substantial, and legally belonging to this boy as the sole beneficiary of Gabriel Miller." The room seemed to shift not into quiet, into awareness. Seth Whitmore's expression drained of confident mockery, replaced with something harder, colder. Ethan didn't know the numbers on that screen yet, but he knew from Whitmore's reaction that whatever waited for him in that account was going to flip his entire world upside down. And that was the moment the story truly began. Director Collins stood a little straighter as he processed the numbers on the monitor, and the shift in his expression made Ethan's stomach twist. He wasn't used to adults reacting to him with anything other than impatience, disinterest, or forced politeness. But now, the director looked at him as if he were something unexpected, something that didn't fit any category Collins had prepared for that morning. Ms. Brooks hovered behind him, her posture stiff, her eyes flicking between the boy and the billionaire standing only a few feet away. "What do you mean substantial?" Henry Whitmore demanded, his tone slicing through the air like a blade. Gone was the arrogant amusement he had been wearing moments earlier. In its place was a sharpness that felt dangerous. Collins didn't immediately respond. He double-checked the documents, the system logs, and the encrypted verification screen that required multiple levels of clearance. Ethan watched him swipe his badge, type more passwords than he thought possible, and examine a digital profile tied to a name he had barely heard growing up, Gabriel Miller, his grandfather. Finally, Collins stepped back. "The account belongs to the Miller Family Trust," he explained, choosing each word carefully. "Your grandfather established it years ago, and records show you are the sole heir." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had never inherited anything, not even a broken watch or an old photograph. His grandfather had died when he was too young to remember him, and Grandma Rose spoke of him rarely, always with a mixture of fondness and pain. The idea that this man who had worked construction most of his life could have had a bank account worth the attention of a corporate bank director felt unreal. Whitmore, however, reacted with something far from disbelief. He stepped closer, crowding the counter. "Let me see that," he snapped, pointing at the screen. Collins blocked the view calmly. "This is confidential financial information." "Don't lecture me on confidentiality," Arthur Whitmore replied. His jaw was tight and his assistants exchanged uneasy glances behind him. "If that kid is claiming ties to one of my companies, I have a right to know who's pulling the strings." "No one is pulling anything," Collins answered. He turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Miller, would you step with me to my office?" Ethan blinked. No one had ever called him Mr. Miller. The title didn't feel like it belonged to him. Whitmore abruptly pushed forward. "He's not going anywhere without proper oversight." Collins gave him a look that belonged to a man who had dealt with powerful clients before, and was no longer in the mood for their theatrics. "Henry, you're welcome to wait in the lobby." This matter concerns the trust's beneficiary, and that is this boy, not you. Ethan followed Collins through a glass door into a smaller office overlooking downtown Chicago. Cars hissed along wet pavement outside, and skyscrapers loomed like steel giants trapping clouds between them. The director motioned for Ethan to sit. Ethan perched on the edge of the chair, unsure whether he should breathe too loudly. The office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Framed certificates lined the wall, degrees from Ivy League schools, awards for excellence, recognitions from financial boards. Everything in the room screamed important, and Ethan felt smaller with every passing second. Collins rotated his monitor slightly, not enough for Ethan to read the numbers, but enough to assure him this wasn't some kind of prank. Ethan, he said, softening his tone, the Miller Family Trust was created 15 years ago. Your grandfather placed several investments into it: real estate holdings, corporate stocks, and a portfolio of long-term assets that have grown significantly over time. Ethan tried to wrap his mind around the idea. His grandfather had lived in a modest apartment. He had worn old boots with cracked soles. He had gone to work early and come home late, covered in dust from job sites. Nothing about the man Ethan had heard about suggested he had access to this kind of money. I don't understand, Ethan admitted. Grandpa worked construction. He didn't have anything. Collins folded his hands on the desk. Sometimes the people who appear to have the least are the ones who planned the most. Your grandfather made smart investments. Very smart. Ethan stared at the floor. Mr. Green had hinted at something important, something life-changing, but Ethan never imagined it could be this. Then Collins spoke the words that changed everything. Your grandfather was an early silent investor in several companies, including Progress Industries. Ethan blinked. The name was familiar. It appeared on hard hats, trucks, and large billboards around the city. It was also one of the companies Henry Whitmore partially ran. Because of compound growth and mergers over the years, Collins continued, your shares are now significant. Ethan didn't know much about stocks or mergers, but he understood significant. He understood it changed people's lives. Can you show me? He whispered. Collins paused, then slowly turned the monitor just enough for Ethan to see the total value of the trust. Ethan's breath caught. The numbers felt unreal. Too many digits, too many commas. He blinked, expecting the image to change, glitch, break, revert to something more familiar, like the $10 he sometimes had after a week of selling candy outside the train station. But the number didn't change. It stared back at him as though waiting for him to accept it. That entire amount is tied to you, Collins explained, and that's not including the properties or the secondary investments. Ethan's head spun. He clutched the arms of the chair, suddenly afraid gravity might let him go. But why me? Why would he do all that for me? Collins gave a long, steady exhale. Your grandfather left notes in the trust indicating he wanted you to grow up without knowing the extent of the money. He believed people become who they truly are only when they are not influenced by wealth. Ethan thought of long nights helping Grandma Rose stretch meals, of patching his backpack with duct tape, of saving coins for bus fare. If his grandfather had wanted him to learn resilience, he had succeeded. A knot formed in his chest, not anger, but something deeper. A strange mix of gratitude and confusion, and the etching sense that he had been living in the shadow of someone he never had a chance to know. Before Ethan could speak, the office door swung open. Whitmore strode in, ignoring Collins' attempt to stop him. Is this true? He demanded, pointing at Ethan like he was accusing him of theft. This boy is claiming holdings in my company. Collins' patience wore thin. The trust owns substantial shares, not the company itself. Substantial, Whitmore repeated, his voice tightening. How substantial? Collins responded evenly, 40% of Progress Industries. Whitmore's face drained of color. Ethan didn't know exactly what 40% meant, but from the billionaire's reaction, it was clearly enough to shift the balance of power. Whitmore leaned closer to Ethan, lowering his voice. Do you have any idea what you re-involved in? No, Ethan admitted honestly. But I guess I'm about to find out. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't bravado. It was a statement made by a boy who had spent his whole life adapting to impossible situations, who understood hardship better than comfort, and who was now standing at the doorway of a future he had never imagined. Whitmore straightened, forced a smile, and looked at Collins. I'll be contacting my legal team. Then he turned back to Ethan. And you kid, we'll be talking soon. He walked out, his steps sharper than before. Collins closed the door again and faced Ethan. You're going to need guidance, he said gently. What happens next may get complicated. Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't know how to feel: hopeful, frightened, overwhelmed, but he knew one thing for certain: his life had just changed. Not because he asked for it, but because his grandfather had believed in him long before he ever believed in himself. Can I call my grandma? He asked, of course. And as Collins handed him the office phone, Ethan realized this wasn't just a discovery or an inheritance or a financial surprise. It was the beginning of a fight he never saw coming, one that would drag him into the world of powerful men who weren't used to losing, especially not to a boy from the South Side. The moment Whitmore stormed out of Director Collins' office, the atmosphere in the bank shifted toward something tense and electric, like a storm rolling in from Lake Michigan. Ethan sat frozen in the chair, still staring at the screen where rows of numbers glowed in quiet defiance of everything he thought he knew about his family. His grandfather wasn't just a hard-working construction foreman who saved every penny to take care of his loved ones. He was a man who had quietly woven himself into the very foundation of companies that shaped the Chicago skyline. And somehow, all of that had been tucked into a trust meant for Ethan. Collins closed the computer and rested his hands on the desk, looking like he was measuring the weight of the moment with the seriousness of someone accustomed to handling big decisions. "Ethan," he said carefully, "being the beneficiary of a trust like this doesn't just mean the money belongs to you. It means your position in certain corporations, especially Progress Industries, holds legal authority." Ethan blinked, not quite grasping it. "Authority how? As a shareholder with your percentage, you technically hold voting power," Collins explained. "In some situations, even more influence than members of the board." Ethan's mind scrambled to understand. "So people have to listen to me. They have to consider your vote," Collins clarified. "And your vote can determine the future of the company." For a kid who hadn't even been able to afford lunch some days, the idea sounded too big, too far-fetched. He barely understood corporate structure, he barely understood taxes. He didn't even fully understand how to navigate the bus system without exact change. Yet here he was, being told he held power over decisions that could make or lose millions. Collins studied him with something like concern. "I know this is overwhelming, but you deserve to understand what you're stepping into." Ethan nodded, though everything inside him felt unsteady, like loose gravel sliding beneath his feet. "What does Mr. Whitmore want?" he asked. Collins leaned back slowly. "Control." The word landed with weight. "Progress Industries is a massive organization. Whitmore has influence, but he's not the majority shareholder. You are. That creates a dynamic he doesn't like." Ethan remembered the way Henry had looked at him, first amused, then furious. He had seen different kinds of anger in his life: frustration, annoyance, bitterness. But Henry's anger wasn't any of those. It was calculated. Cold, like a man who couldn't believe a piece of his empire had just been handed to a kid from South Side. Collins continued, "He may try to convince you to sell your shares. He may offer you a large payout." Ethan frowned. Why would he want them that bad? Because whoever controls the shares controls the direction of the company. And Progress Industries is a major player in the Midwest economy. Collins paused. He likely already called his legal team. Ethan swallowed hard. "So what do I do?" "For now, nothing without proper guidance. And no agreements, no signatures. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded. When they stepped out of the office, several employees glanced up, whispering to each other the way people do when news spreads faster than reason. Ethan wished he could disappear into his hoodie. He didn't want attention. He didn't want people looking at him like he was some kind of walking headline. He missed being invisible, even if invisibility had meant being overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. Officer Javier Lopez approached with a firm but reassuring stride. "Kid, you okay?" Ethan nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure. Javier crossed his arms, word as Whitmore tried to strong-arm the conversation. "Don't let that guy get in your head, he plays rough." "So have you noticed?" Ethan muttered. Javier smirked. "Welcome to adult problems, you jumping in faster than most." The comment should have been funny, but Ethan just felt the weight of it. Ms. Brooks stepped forward with a folder. "These are documents confirming the trust status," she explained. "Nothing confidential inside, just basics you can take home." She hesitated, then added, "Your grandfather must have cared a lot about you." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He didn't know whether his grandfather cared or whether the old man had simply been forward-thinking. But he wanted to believe it was love. He needed to believe that. When Ethan walked back into the lobby, the last person he expected to see was Henry Whitmore waiting for him. The billionaire stood near the exit with the posture of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. His assistants hovered nearby, tapping phones and whispering updates. Ethan braced himself as Henry approached, adjusting the cuffs of his $1,000 suit. "You've had quite a day, haven't you?" Henry said, voice smooth like polished marble. Ethan didn't answer. Henry continued, "I know you don't understand the position you're in. You're a kid. You don't have the education, the experience, or the perspective to make decisions in a world like mine." Ethan crossed his arms. "It's not your world, it's just business." Henry chuckled once. "Business runs the world." He lowered his voice. "You're holding assets that could shift the balance of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That kind of power doesn't belong in the hands of a child who doesn't even know what a corporate proxy is." Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. My grandfather left this for me. Maybe he thought I'd figure it out. Maybe your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly, Henry replied. Or maybe he never expected to actually use them. He leaned closer. Sell them to me, name your price. You'll walk away rich beyond anything you've dreamed of. Ethan shook his head. I don't want to sell anything. Henry's jaw tensed. Everyone has a price, not me. Henry's expression shifted again away from persuasion and into calculation. If you keep those shares, you will be responsible for decisions affecting thousands of employees, shareholders, contracts, and government partnerships. Keeping them means stepping into a world that will swallow you whole. Are you prepared for that? Ethan straightened. I'll learn. Henry stared at him, eyes narrowing. You think this is a game. You think you're brave, but bravery doesn't stop consequences. And you have no idea what kind of pressure comes with power. Ethan held his ground. Sounds like your problem, not mine. The assistants froze. Henry's nostrils flared slightly. Careful, boy, he murmured. Power invites attention. Attention invites enemies. You're walking into a level of conflict you can't even picture. Ethan stared back. You don't scare me. Henry tilted his head with a small, chilling smile. That's because you don't know enough yet. He stepped toward the revolving doors, but before leaving he gave one final look over his shoulder. We'll revisit this conversation, he promised. And when we do, you will understand why men like me don't tolerate obstacles. After he left, Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Cullens placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Don't let him intimidate you. Your grandfather believed in you, and you're not alone in this. Ethan nodded, though inside, something deep and unfamiliar stretched awake a fierce determination that felt older than he was. Like the echo of a voice he'd never heard but somehow recognized. He didn't fully understand the fight ahead. But he understood one thing clearly: if Henry Whitmore wanted control, he would have to earn it. Ethan was no longer just a kid trying to check his balance. He was a player in a game he had never asked to join, and he wasn't backing down. The moment Whitmore disappeared through the revolving doors, Director Cullens guided Ethan back into his office, shutting out the uneasy whispers drifting across the bank lobby. Ethan sat again in the same chair where his life had shifted only minutes earlier, but now everything felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of new responsibility. Cullens didn't rush to speak. He gathered a stack of documents, set them neatly in front of Ethan, and finally took his seat with the seriousness of a man delivering news that could either build or break a future. Ethan, Cullens began, carefully choosing his tone. I need to explain what comes next. Having access to this trust doesn't mean the funds are immediately handed to you. Ethan nodded, expecting as much. He could barely get a debit card without an adult. It wasn't surprising that millions of dollars required rules. But he didn't yet understand the depth of those rules. Cullens folded his hands. Because you're still a minor, federal regulations require a legal guardian to act as trustee. That means someone must manage the funds in your best interest until you turn 18. Ethan straightened. My grandma can do that. For the first time, Cullens hesitated, possibly, but she'll need to be approved. There is a verification process. The court has to confirm she is capable physically, financially, and legally. Ethan stiffened. She takes care of me just fine. I'm sure she does, Cullens said gently. But the trust contains corporate voting power and multi-million-dollar assets. The court evaluates everything: medical stability, financial history, even home conditions. Ethan felt a pinch behind his ribs. Grandma Rose had cataracts. Some days she struggled with stairs. Their house wasn't new, it wasn't even close to safe by most standards. But she had always provided love, food when she could, and protection. What more did they need? Cullens continued, unaware of the growing tension in Ethan's chest. The earliest steps involved notifying the trust's current administrative attorney, filing a petition for guardianship, and preparing an affidavit detailing your living situation. During that time, the trust is locked from major withdrawals. Only essential expenses can be considered. Ethan's frustration stirred. So I can't do anything. Not yet. You can't manage the assets alone. Cullens adjusted his glasses. However, you do have legal standing. Your grandfather ensured that your voting privileges within the corporations activate immediately, even though the financial access is restricted. Ethan frowned. Does that mean someone else can still make decisions for me? No, Cullens said firmly. The voting power is yours. A guardian cannot override it. Your grandfather protected that part deliberately. That revelation eased a sliver of Ethan's worry. His grandfather had thought ahead, far ahead. But anxiety returned as Cullens opened a new file and slid it into the light. Now the problem, he said, tapping the page with a controlled intensity. Henry Whitmore has already emailed the Board of Progress Industries. He's requesting an emergency review of your eligibility as a shareholder due to your age. Ethan felt the pressure of those words settle like cold stone in his stomach. Can he do that? He can request it, Collins replied. But he cannot revoke your rights. What he can do is complicate the process. He's claiming that your presence as a major shareholder poses a risk to corporate stability. Ethan clenched his jaw. That's not fair. It isn't, Collins agreed. But fairness isn't always what drives decisions at that level. Whitmore is accustomed to control. Your inheritance places you directly in his path. Ethan leaned forward. So what do we do? First, Collins said, we secure legal representation. You can't navigate this alone. The trust is built in funds specifically reserved for legal protection. Your grandfather anticipated potential conflict. The idea that his grandfather had known this battle might come stirred something fierce in Ethan. He had never met the man, yet somehow Gabriel Miller had prepared a path for him, one paved with both opportunity and obstacles. Collins continued, second, avoid communicating directly with Mr. Whitmore or anyone representing him. Anything you say could be used as leverage. People in his position are experts at twisting conversations to their advantage. Ethan nodded slowly, imagining Whitmore's cold smile. He tried to get me to sell. Right there in the lobby. Of course he did, Collins said. Your shares hold significant voting power. They could determine outcomes he's been chasing for years. The director opened another folder. There's one more thing. Whitmore may reach out to the court or to Child Protective Services. Ethan's chest tightened again. Why would he do that? To argue that your current living situation is unstable. If he convinces them to intervene, the court could temporarily assign a state guardian. A corporate guardian could then claim influence over your trust, something Whitmore would exploit. Ethan almost stood out of instinct. He can't take me away from my grandma. Collins lifted a hand. It's not that simple. And it's not guaranteed he'll try. But you need to be aware of the possibility. Men like Whitmore look for weaknesses. Not because they want custody of you, but because they want custody of your influence. The words carried a gravity that tarried in the air. Ethan stared at the floor, mind racing. Their little house inside wasn't glamorous. Their fridge sometimes ran short. Their rent was always a month behind until he sold enough candy to help. But it was home. And now some billionaire wanted to use his home as a weapon against him. What do I do to protect my grandma? Ethan asked quietly. Collins' gaze softened. Be truthful in every interview. Follow every legal instruction. And keep records of everything: school attendance, medical visits, bills paid. Judges favor transparency. Ethan nodded, determination building. And what do I do about Whitmore? Collins gave a small, humorless smile. You stay patient. That is the one thing he's not prepared for. Ethan exhaled, trying to settle the tension twisting through him. So what happens first? First, Collins said, we call your grandmother. We explain everything. Then we begin the paperwork for guardianship. And in the meantime, we prepare for Whitmore's next move. Before they left the office, Collins added one final caution. Ethan, I need you to understand something. Power attracts challenges. But it also attracts people who will stand with you. Your grandfather knew that too. He didn't choose this path for you lightly. As the director escorted Ethan toward the lobby, Ethan noticed the shifts in the faces around him, tellers glancing curiously in his direction, customers quietly speculating, even Javier watching with a protective expression he hadn't worn earlier. Ethan felt exposed, like the ground beneath him had changed shape and he was learning to walk again. When they reached the front doors, Ethan looked back through the wide glass panes toward the towering heart of Chicago. He had walked into the bank that morning as a kid with $10 and a frayed backpack. Now he was stepping out as something else, something he didn't fully understand yet. Something dangerous to a billionaire like Henry Whitmore. And as the revolving doors spun behind him, Ethan realized the truth Collins hadn't said out loud. Whitmore wasn't done. He was only getting started. The bus ride home felt longer than usual, even though the road hadn't changed. Ethan sat near the window, watching the blurred gray of Chicago's winter sky rush past the city blocks. His fingers tapped absently against his backpack where the folder of documents rested, heavier than any textbook he had ever carried. Across from him, Grandma Rose sat quietly, clutching her purse with both hands, her cloudy eyes trying to read his expression even though she couldn't see clearly. She had only heard part of the story from Director Collins when Ethan called her from the bank. The rest, what it meant, how big it truly was up to Ethan to explain. But he hadn't been ready. Not on the phone, not on the bus. Not even now as they approached their stop near their worn-down apartment building where the paint peeled like curling leaves. When they stepped off the bus, the cold wind scraped against their cheeks. Grandma Rose tightened her scarf and placed a steady hand on Ethan's arm. You all right, honey? She asked. Ethan nodded even though his thoughts were knotted tight. Rose's steps were slow, careful. Her vision had worsened over the last year, and winter sidewalks made her nervous. Ethan kept close, guiding her over the cracked concrete toward their building. The same graffiti-covered brick wall, the same flickering hallway light, The same creaking stairwell, everything looked exactly as it had that morning. But Ethan didn't feel like the same boy who had left this place hours ago. As soon as they entered their apartment, Grandma Rose hung her coat on the back of the kitchen chair and lowered herself into the seat with a tired sigh. "All right," she said, resting her hands on the table. "Tell me everything, sweetheart, from the beginning." Ethan placed the folder on the table carefully, like it was something fragile, and sat across from her. He stared at the papers, unsure where to start. "Grandma, it's real," he finally said. "The account, the trust, all of it." Rose blinked, trying to follow. "How real?" "Millions," Ethan said, forcing the word out. "Actual millions, investments, stocks, property." "Grandpa, he left it all for me." Rose leaned back slightly, a hand rising to her chest. "Gabriel." She whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. He had money." Ethan nodded. "A lot. He invested in companies years ago. They grew. And now I own, well, a huge part of something called Progress Industries, and others too." Rose looked toward the window, her expression clouded with memories. "He never told me," she murmured. "Not a word. All those nights he came home with dust in his hair. All those years we scraped by." Never imagined. Her voice trailed off. Ethan didn't know what to say. He wondered whether she felt betrayed or proud, confused or grateful. Maybe she felt all of it at once. When her gaze returned to him, her eyes were wet. "Your grandfather must have had his reasons." "Lord knows he wasn't a simple man." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma, there's more." She tensed immediately. "More?" He nodded. "A man named Henry Whitmore, some billionaire. He's mad that I got the shares. He tried to get me to sell them. He even tried to make it seem like I shouldn't have them. Cullen says he's going to try harder. He might even try to use, well, our living situation to make things difficult." Rose stiffened, her fingers clenching around the fabric of her sweater. "Our living situation. He might try to argue it's not stable," Ethan explained, hating the words even as they came out. "He might try to say you can't be my guardian because of your eyesight or money or something like that." Rose's breath caught. "He'd go after a child's home just to get what he wants." Ethan nodded. Rose didn't speak for a moment. She looked around their tiny kitchen, the old stove with the chipped knobs, the wobbly table leg, the stack of overdue utility bills tucked under the fruit bowl. She wasn't ashamed of their life, but she knew how people like Whitmore viewed it. "Men like him don't stop at hard boundaries," she finally said. "They move them." Ethan swallowed, the fear he had been pushing down rising again. "Director Cullen said we'll need to go to court. They'll investigate everything. They'll check the house. They'll check you." Rose lifted her chin. "Let them check. I raised you right. We've survived worse than paperwork." Ethan wanted to believe that, but he also knew the world didn't always reward good people. Especially not when the wealthy wanted something. Rose reached across the table and took his hands. "Ethan, listen to me. Whatever your grandfather left you, he left for a reason. He trusted you. He trusted your heart. Don't let some powerful man scare you out of that." "What if he tries to take me away from you?" Ethan asked, voice cracking. Rose squeezed. "He won't. And even if he tried, he'd be fighting a grandmother who hasn't lost a battle yet." She smiled, a small but determined curve of her lips. Ethan felt some of the pressure lift, but not enough. "Cullen said I have to be careful. I can't talk to Whitmore. I can't agree to anything, and I need a lawyer." "We'll get one," Rose said. "Your grandfather made sure of it. He always thought ahead." Ethan stood and walked toward the small living room, staring at the old family photo on the wall, one of the few in which his grandfather appeared. The man in the picture had broad shoulders, rough hands, and eyes that looked they carried more stories than he ever shared. Ethan wondered what Gabriel had expected from him. Did he think Ethan would be strong enough, smart enough, brave enough? Sometimes he wasn't sure he was any of those things. Rose joined him slowly, placing a hand on his back. "Your grandfather was a quiet planner," she said. "He didn't need to talk big, he acted big. And he saw something in you worth protecting." Ethan stared at the photo a moment longer. "Grandma, I don't know anything about business, or stocks, or companies, or any of this." "You will learn," she said with certainty, "and you won't be alone." He nodded. But even with her reassurance, he felt the pull of something unfamiliar, something that felt like both power and danger. "What if I make a mistake?" he asked quietly. Rose wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Then you get back up? That's what Millers do." Just then, a car engine rumbled outside, loud, smooth, distinctly expensive. Ethan stepped toward the window and pushed the curtain aside. A black SUV idled near the curb, tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. It didn't move, it didn't park. It just sat there, engine humming. Rose frowned. "Someone visiting?" "No," Ethan whispered. His chest tightened. "I don't think so." For a long moment, the SUV remained where it was, its presence unnerving. Then it eased away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Rose exhaled slowly, maybe just someone lost. But Ethan knew better. Whitmore had warned him that powerful men didn't tolerate obstacles. Tonight, Ethan realized they also didn't wait long to make their presence known. That evening, the wind sweeping through the south side carried the kind of cold that crawled beneath doors, lingered in the corners of small apartments. Ethan had barely touched his dinner, pushing peas around on his plate without appetite. Grandma Rose had attempted a brave face, humming softly as she washed dishes. But Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders and the way she checked the window every few minutes. Neither of them had mentioned the black SUV again. Maybe they didn't need to. Its presence echoed through their thoughts with enough weight already. A sharp knock rattled the apartment door. Rose stiffened, drying her hands quickly on a towel. Ethan's heart jumped. He felt the echo of fear climb up his spine before she even reached the door. But when she opened it, relief washed over her features. "Thomas," she breathed, stepping aside to let him in. Thomas Green entered with a careful step, his leather coat still dusted from the cold air outside. His face, lined with age and experience, held an expression that mixed concern and urgency. "Evening, Rose," he said softly before turning to Ethan with a nod. "And you, young man, heard you had quite a day." Ethan forced a weak smile. "Yeah, something like that." Tums took off his hat and settled into the kitchen chair like someone who had come prepared to deliver answers. "I came as soon as I got the call from Collins," he said. "He told me everything. And I'm here to make sure you both understand what we re-up against." Rose sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. "I don't want him scared," she said, gesturing toward Ethan. "But I do want the truth." Tums nodded. "You'll have it." Ethan took a seat beside his grandmother, glancing briefly at the folder he had placed earlier on the table. It felt like a constant reminder of how everything in his world had shifted. Tums cleared his throat. "First, let's talk about the trust. Everything your grandfather invested, every share, every property was placed legally under your name. That much is unshakable. No one, not even Whitmore, can take away what Gabriel left you." Ethan exhaled slowly, but Tums raised a finger. "However, that doesn't mean Whitmore won't try to make the process as difficult as possible." Rose bristled. "Why, what does he want with a boy?" "Not the boy," Tums said, "the power attached to the boy." Ethan swallowed, the weight of those words pressing on him again. Tums continued, "Progress Industries isn't just any company. It's tied to half a dozen major contracts in the Midwest: public transportation infrastructure, city development deals, renewable energy projects. Whoever controls its voting shares controls the future of billions." Rose blinked, stunned, and Gabriel had that kind of influence. "More than anyone knew," Tums replied. "Your husband played the long game, made smart moves, took risks no one expected a construction foreman to take, and every risk paid off." Ethan felt a bloom of pride swell inside him. "Then why didn't he tell us?" Rose asked, her voice carrying both awe and heartbreak. "Because he didn't want the money changing who you were," Thomas said gently. "He came from nothing. He understood how wealth can twist people. He wanted Ethan to grow up honest, grounded, shaped by the world instead of sheltered from it." Ethan leaned back. "Grandpa trusted you," he said. "Why didn't he tell you?" Thomas smiled softly. "He did, but not everything. He told me enough to prepare for this day, but he wanted the details locked away until the right time. He believed that when the world tried to test his grandson, the truth would be Ethan's shield." Rose looked toward Ethan, her eyes glistening. "That sounds like Gabriel," she murmured, "always protecting us, even when we didn't know." Tums nodded, then his expression hardened. "But protection only works if we stay smart. Whitmore is not the kind of man who accepts losing. He spent years trying to consolidate control of Progress Industries. And today he learned that a 12-year-old holds more sway over his future than he does." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. "I didn't ask for any of this," "No," Tums agreed, "but it's here now. And what you do next will shape a lot more than your bank account." Rose shifted in her chair. "We were already worried he might try something dirty." A car was parked outside earlier, dark windows, just sitting there. Tums's eyes sharpened. "Did it follow you?" "No," Rose said, "but it felt out of place." Tums rubbed his chin. "I wouldn't put it past Whitmore to scout you. He likes to know his opponent's weaknesses before making his move." Ethan tightened his grip on the edge of the table. "Collins said he might try to use our living situation against us. He might." Tums confirmed. "He could file concerns with Child Protective Services or prompt a court investigation. He'll claim he's thinking about your well-being, but it's all about leverage." Rose's fingers trembled slightly. "They'd try to take him away. Not without cause," Tums assured. "And they won't find, 'cause here, you love this boy. You've raised him well. That counts. And I'll be right beside you when we go through the evaluations." Ethan's heart steadied a little. "So what do we do now?" "We prepare," Tums said. "Legally, emotionally, mentally. The first step is hiring a trust attorney, someone who understands corporate control and guardianship law. They'll help you navigate the court process to ensure Rose is appointed as your legal guardian for the trust." He paused. and we gather documentation proving this home is stable, school reports, medical records, bills paid. Anything that paints a clear picture of your life here." Ethan nodded, rose straightened with newfound resolve. "We'll do it whatever it takes." Thomas gave a firm nod. "Good. And Ethan, there's something else. Your grandfather left instructions that you weren't meant to be passive in this. You were not a placeholder shareholder. You were meant to participate, to vote, to protect the workers your grandfather believed in." Ethan felt a quiver in his chest. "I don't know enough yet. You will," Tom's promised. "And you already know more than you think. You know fairness. You know hard work. You know struggle. These executives Whitmore surrounds himself with. They've forgotten those things." Ethan stared at his grandfather's old framed picture again. The man looked strong, steady, unbothered by the noise of the world. "If Grandpa were here," Ethan said quietly, "what would he tell me to do?" Tom smiled faintly. "He'd tell you what he always said, stand up straight. Don't let fear choose your path." The words settled deep inside Ethan, filling a space that had felt empty since he left the bank. The sov outside, the looming threat of trials, the uncertain future, all of it still scared him. But his grandfather had faced a world that underestimated him too, and he had built something lasting. Tom stood, pulling on his coat. "I'll be back tomorrow morning. We'll start the paperwork and meet with the attorney. And Ethan, don't walk alone anywhere for now. Stick close to Rose or me." Ethan nodded. "Got it." Rose walked Tom's to the door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping Gabriel and now his grandson." Tom's placed a hand over his heart. "Gabriel saved my life once. This is me honoring that debt." As he left, Ethan watched him disappear down the hallway, feeling the first flicker of something stronger than fear, purpose. The fight ahead would be bigger than anything he had ever imagined, but he wasn't facing it alone. The next morning, Ethan walked into Lincoln Jefferson Public School with his hood pulled low, hoping the building's usual noise and chaos would drown out everything still swirling in his mind from the night before. But the moment he stepped through the main doors, he felt eyes on him more than usual. Conversations dipped, backpacks paused mid-swing, and a few students standing near the lockers leaned in to whisper behind cupped hands. Ethan wasn't used to attention. He'd spent most of his life blending into the edges of classrooms and hallways. But today the air felt different, thick with curiosity and rumor. He headed straight toward homeroom, keeping his gaze on the floor, but even there, the subtle changes were impossible to ignore. Teachers who normally didn't acknowledge him offered overly warm smiles. Ms. Ramirez, who usually reserved encouraging comments for the top students, greeted him as if he had just returned from winning an academic award. "Good morning, Ethan," she said in a careful tone, one that carried an exaggerated gentleness. "If you need anything today, anything at all, you let me know." Ethan blinked, unsure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. Okay, he murmured before slipping into his seat. He wasn't seated for more than 30 seconds before his friend Lucas slid into the desk beside him, wide-eyed and buzzing with energy. "Dude?" Lucas whispered, "Is it true?" Ethan lifted an eyebrow. "Is what true?" Lucas glanced around dramatically. "That you like rich now." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Who told you that?" Lucas shrugged. "Everybody's talking about it. Someone said their mom works at the bank and overheard something. Then Jamie said his uncle is a janitor there and heard a billionaire arguing with the manager. And guess whose name came up?" Ethan groaned, burying his face in his hands. "This is not happening." "Oh, it's happening," Lucas confirmed. "I mean, I'd be cool with it if it were me. But you look like you want to crawl into your backpack and disappear." Ethan didn't respond. He knew rumors spread fast in school, but he hadn't expected them to spread overnight. He could feel the weight of every glance, every muttered question, every curious stare poking holes in the thin layer of normalcy he had hoped to keep. At the front of the room, Ms. Ramirez began writing the day's lesson on the board. But she kept glancing his way, as if expecting him to collapse under the pressure of being the sudden center of attention. The morning dragged on, each class filled with whispered conversations that ended abruptly whenever he walked by. It wasn't the kind of attention he had imagined wealth might attract. It wasn't admiration so much as fascination, envy, and a touch of fear. Kids who had never spoken to him suddenly asked if they could borrow pencils or sit near him. Others avoided meeting his eyes entirely, as if unsure how to talk to someone who now belongs to a world far different from theirs. But Ethan didn't feel different. He still lived in the same apartment. Still worried about the same things. Still couldn't buy lunch without counting crumpled bills first. During lunch he attempted to hide at a corner table, but the cafeteria felt uncomfortably observant. Lucas plopped down beside him with a tray of pizza and chocolate milk. So Lucas began, "What's the deal? Are you like the owner of a company now?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "I just inherited something, and people are overreacting." "Overreacting?" Lucas snorted. "Dude, you were talking to a billionaire yesterday. Kids think you fought him or something." Ethan rolled his eyes. Great. Before Lucas could continue, Ethan noticed two men in suits standing near the school office window across the cafeteria. They weren't eating. They weren't talking. They were simply watching the room with an unsettling stillness. Adults occasionally came to observe, but these men didn't look like district workers or counselors. They looked out of place, too polished, too rigid, too focused. Ethan's chest tightened. Lucas, do you know those guys? Lucas followed his gaze. Nope, he said. But they look like the type of people who'd show up in movies where the bad guys wear cufflinks. Ethan tried to eat, but the sensation of being watched gnawed at him. The men remained there even after he left the cafeteria, their eyes following him as he disappeared into the hallway. When he reached his locker, his science teacher, Mr. Carlton, approached with a warm but overly curious smile. Ethan, he said, I heard you might need some flexibility with assignments soon. Is everything okay at home? The question landed strangely, caring but probing. Ethan hesitated. We were fine. If you ever need to talk, my door is open. And if you need extensions, just say the word. Ethan appreciated it, but something about the sudden wave of concern felt orchestrated, as if teachers had been told to keep an eye on him. And then the thought hit him, what if they were? What if Whitmore had already reached out to the school? He suddenly remembered Cullen's warning Whitmore might try to trigger an investigation by portraying Ethan's situation as unstable. If school staff began reporting observations, stress, distraction, unusual behavior, it could feed into that. By the time the final bell rang, Ethan felt wrung out, but the day wasn't done yet. Near the school gates, a sleek black sedan idled. Not the same SUV from last night, but equally expensive, equally threatening in its presence. Lucas waved goodbye and jogged off, leaving Ethan alone on the sidewalk. Grandma Rose was supposed to pick him up on the bus, but she was running late. Ethan tightened his backpack strap and stepped toward the corner, feeling the sedan's presence like a shadow following him. The passenger window rolled down halfway. A neatly dressed woman with a clipboard leaned out. Ethan Miller. She called in a professionally trained voice. Ethan froze. Who's asking? She offered a practiced smile. I'm Karen Holt from the Illinois Department of Child and Family Services. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Ethan's heart raced. Whitmore had moved faster than he expected. Before Ethan could respond, another voice cut in, a firm, familiar one. Not today, ma'am. Tom Screen stepped up beside him, gripping his cane with authority. Any questions can go through his legal team. This child is not speaking to anyone without counsel present. Karen's smile faltered. This is simply an informal, Thomas interrupted, is what people say when they want to skip procedures. File your request properly. The woman hesitated, then withdrew her clipboard and nodded curtly. The car drove off. Ethan exhaled in relief and tension. She's with Peace. She's with Whitmore. Tom's corrected. He wants pressure. That was the first push. There will be more. Ethan looked down the street where the car had vanished. How do I fight someone like him? Tums placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You don't fight alone, and you don't fight on his terms. Your grandfather left you more than money. Ethan, he left you allies. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of the day settling deep inside him. School was no longer just school. Life was no longer just life. Whitmore had begun his campaign, and Ethan had stepped into a world far larger than he ever imagined. By the next morning, snow flurries drifted across the south side like tiny crystals carried on a restless wind. Ethan woke up early, not because of excitement, but because his mind refused to rest. He could still see yesterday's CP's car, still feel the weight of every whisper at school, still hear Whitmore's voice twisted with a warning he didn't fully understand. When he stepped into the kitchen, Grandma Rose was already up, wearing her worn pink robe and stirring oatmeal on the stove. She offered him a soft smile, but he saw the strain behind it. Today was important. Today they would meet the attorney Gabriel Miller had arranged years before his death. Thomas arrived exactly at 8, brushing snow from his coat as he stepped inside. Ready? He asked, looking between Ethan and Rose. His tone carried no softness today, only purpose. As ready as we'll ever be, Rose replied. They took the bus downtown, bundled together for warmth. Chicago's skyline grew sharper as they neared the legal district, the high-rises standing like cold sentinels over the frozen river. Ethan pressed his forehead against the bus window, watching the city glide by. Part of him still felt like he didn't belong here among briefcases and business suits. But another part, small, stubborn, felt like he had no choice but to adapt. The attorney's office sat on the 22nd floor of a glass tower. The lobby alone looked expensive, with marble floors and an ornate chandelier that glimmered like icicles. Ethan stayed close to his grandmother as Tums led them toward a polished brass door engraved with a single name, Harvey D. Lennox, Esq. Tums knocked once. A voice from inside called out, "Come in!" The man behind the desk looked older than Tums, but sharper, with white hair combed neatly and a suit tailored so perfectly it barely wrinkled when he moved. His eyes pale blue and focus lifted to observe them with a kind of calculated precision Ethan had only seen in chess players on TV. Mrs. Rose Miller, Lennox greeted warmly as he rose to shake her hand. I knew your husband well, he spoke of you often. Rose's brows lift. He did, Lennox nodded. Gabriel was an expressive man, but he was loyal, and he trusted very few. Thomas here was one, you, he said, gesturing to Ethan, were the other. Ethan shifted, unsure how to respond. Lennox motioned for them to sit. Now, he said, settling back into his chair, I understand there has been an attempt by Henry Whitmore to discredit Ethan's legal standing as a beneficiary. Thomas snorted. Attempt. The man had ceased sniffing around his school within 24 hours. Lennox did not seem surprised. That aligns with his pattern of behavior. Henry Whitmore is known for testing boundaries until someone forces him to respect them. He opened a thick folder on his desk. Your grandfather anticipated that someone might challenge the legitimacy of this trust. So he left instructions, very thorough instructions. Ethan, your voting rights within Progress Industries activate immediately because Gabriel wanted your voice to matter from the start. He also wanted to prevent corporate predators from exploiting a loophole due to your age. Ethan leaned forward. But Whitmore's already fighting me. Of course he is, Lennox replied. He's been attempting to consolidate control for years. Your inheritance disrupts his plan. The attorney turned to Rose. As for you, Mrs. Miller, we will petition the court to appoint you as the full legal guardian of Ethan's trust. Your age or eyesight will not disqualify you unless there is evidence of harm or neglect, which there is not. Rose exhaled, visibly relieved. But Lennox wasn't finished. However, he said, tapping the folder, Whitmore's influence is not limited to corporate halls. He has friends in every corner, judges, agents, school administrators, even state investigators. We must be meticulous. Ethan's stomach tightened. So we were really in danger. Lennox's gaze softened. You are in a battle, not a danger, and battles require strategy. He pressed a button on his desk, and a large monitor flickered on, showing a chart of Progress Industries' shareholder structure. Ethan recognized his name near the top, beside a large percentage number that still felt surreal. As it stands, Lennox explained, you control 38% of the voting shares. Whitmore holds 16. The remaining shares are scattered across board members and public investors. Rose frowned. So why does he care so much? Lennox clasped his hands. Because control isn't about owning the most, it's about influencing enough. Whitmore has built alliances inside the boardroom. With your grandfather gone, he expected to secure additional votes and gain majority influence. Thomas added, but with Ethan stepping in, that path is blocked. Lennox nodded. So Whitmore's only remaining strategy is to discredit the heir to make Ethan appear unfit. If the court assigns a state guardian, that guardian may be pressured or manipulated, and corporate votes could be redirected. Ethan felt anger pulse through him. So he wants to control me by removing my grandma. He wants to control your asset, Lennox corrected. You are simply attached to it. Rose reached for Ethan's hand, grip steady. He's not taking anything from us, she whispered. Lennox reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope with Gabriel's name written in careful cursive. Your grandfather left a personal letter, he said. One for you and one for me. He believed this fight might come. And he believed you would be ready. Ethan stared at the envelope, heart pounding. Can I open it? Not yet, Lennox said gently. There is a time for strategy and a time for reflection. Today we strengthen our position. He outlined the legal steps ahead, filing the guardianship petition, preparing home evaluations, compiling proof of stability, requesting injunctions to prevent Whitmore's interference, and documenting every unusual contact made by investigators or unknown individuals. Whitmore will escalate, Lennox warned. He will call emergency board meetings. He may reach out through intermediaries, journalists, lawyers, even classmates' parents. Expect misinformation. Expect pressure. Ethan swallowed. And what do I do? Lennox offered a firm, reassuring look. You stay consistent. You attend school. You keep your grades steady. You stay visible as a responsible young man. And you do not speak to anyone about the trust unless Thomas or I am present. Thomas leaned back. And stay away from strangers in suits. Lennox nodded, and from Whitmore, especially Whitmore. Ethan took a deep breath. What about the voting thing? Do I actually have to go to meetings? Lennox smiled faintly. Yes, eventually. And your voice will matter, but one step at a time. First, we secure the guardianship, then we prepare you for the corporate arena. As the meeting wrapped up, Lennox gave Rose a folder of documents and offered Ethan a steady nod. Your grandfather believed in you, and he chose his allies well. Whitmore is powerful, but he is not invincible. Outside, as snow continued drifting across the city, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. The world had shifted again, but this time, instead of shrinking, he felt himself growing into a role he had never imagined. The battle had begun, and this time he wasn't stepping into it alone. Monday arrived with a heavy sky, the kind that warned of snow but refused to release it. Ethan trudged toward Lincoln Jefferson Public School with his backpack pulled tight, the familiar cracks in the sidewalk looking sharper than usual. Meetings with attorneys, guardianship petitions, corporate shares, none of it fit into the world of faded lockers and cafeteria trays. Yet as he approached the school's main entrance, he felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the winter wind. Something was different today. He could sense it before he even walked inside. The hallways buzzed with chatter, but it wasn't the usual sleepy Monday murmur. Groups of students clustered around their phones, whispering sharply and breaking away as Ethan approached. Lucas jogged up to him almost immediately, eyes wide. "Dude," he said breathlessly, "something's going on." Teachers were called into a meeting before the bell. They looked freaked out. Ethan frowned. Freaked out how? Like when the school board comes to visit, or when someone sues the district. Lucas lowered his voice. Or when some billionaire makes a phone call. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Whitmore," Lucas nodded grimly. "Who else?" The bell rang overhead, echoing through the hall. Before Ethan could move toward class, he saw Mr. Hammond, the assistant principal, step out of his office and look directly at him. Not past him, not around him, at him. Hammond's expression was forced into a smile, but something about it felt rehearsed, like a man following instructions he didn't agree with. "Ethan," he called, waving him over. "I need to see you for a moment." Lucas muttered, "This feels bad," before slipping away. Ethan approached slowly. "Did I do something?" "Not at all," Hammond replied too quickly. "We just need to touch base." He motioned for Ethan to follow him down the hallway. Teachers stepped aside as they passed, watching in ways that made Ethan's skin crawl. Not pitying, not angry, just evaluating. As if they had been told he was suddenly a liability. Inside Hammond's office, the assistant principal gestured to the chair across from his desk. Ethan sat, heart thudding. Hammond sat as well, smoothing his tie, avoiding eye contact. "So, Ethan," he began with an overly gentle tone, "we've received some calls from district officials requesting updates on your well-being." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "District officials?" "Yes," Hammond said, clearing his throat. "Calls from outside sources expressing concern about stability at home, ensuring you have what you need, that you're safe, happy, supported." Ethan didn't miss the pattern. These were the exact terms Collins and Lennox had warned him about. Words used to mask intrusion. "Who called?" Ethan asked. Hammond hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to say," which told Ethan everything. Whitmore wasn't hiding, just operating through layers. Using influence disguised as concern, manipulating the system one gentle-sounding inquiry at a time. Hammond continued, "We were also being asked to keep an eye on your academic performance, attendance, emotional state, interactions with peers." Ethan winced. "So you re-monitoring me?" Hammond sighed. "We re-observing. There's a difference." "Not really," Ethan muttered. Hammond leaned forward. "Ethan, understand this isn't personal. The school has to follow district directives. And someone, whoever it is, has made it clear that your situation is unusual. Unusual, a neat word that meant more trouble was coming. They mentioned," Hammond added awkwardly, "that your financial circumstances have changed." Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. "I didn't tell anyone here." "We know," Hammond said with a sympathetic nod. "But someone did. And once those things reach the wrong ears, they spread." A soft knock sounded at the office door before Hammond could say more. Ms. Paddle, the school counselor, stepped inside wearing a smile was meant to be reassuring but carried in an edge of formality. "Hi, Ethan," she said. "I think it would be good for us to chat for a few minutes as well." Ethan stared at her. "Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all," she replied, taking the seat beside him. "We just want to check in. Another check-in, another concern. Another box to tick on some report being fed to people who didn't care about him, only about weakening him." Paddle glanced at the folder in her lap. "Your teachers mentioned you seemed distracted last week." "Understandable, given, well, everything." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Everything what?" Paddle looked uncomfortable. "Our job is to support you, Ethan. But to do that we need transparency." He met her gaze steadily. "Are you asking for transparency or reporting on me?" She didn't answer. The pause was answer enough. Paddle flipped open her folder anyway. "So I'm going to ask you a few questions. You can answer however you feel comfortable." She spoke through a list. Did he feel safe at home? Did he have enough food? Was his grandmother physically capable? Was he stressed? Did he feel overwhelmed? Did he feel his home life might negatively affect his schoolwork? Ethan answered calmly, evenly, refusing to give Whitmore any ammunition. When Paddle finished, she gave him another almost genuine smile. "Thank you, Ethan, if you ever need to talk." "Yeah," Ethan said softly, standing. "I'll let you know." Hammond dismissed him with a nod, and Ethan stepped into the hallway feeling watched in a way he had never experienced before. Students paused mid-conversation as he walked by. Teachers observed him through classroom windows like he was part of some experiment. Even the security guard, Mr. Collins, not related to the bank director, gave him a look that felt too aware. At lunchtime the tension escalated. As soon as Ethan sat down, two more unfamiliar adults entered the cafeteria, clipboard holders, badges, professional attire. They scanned the room before focusing on Ethan, making notes each time he shifted or spoke. Lucas noticed too. "Dude," he whispered, "that's creepy. What are they doing?" "Watching," Ethan said bitterly. "Everyone is watching." Lucas frowned. "Because of Whitmore?" Ethan nodded. "My attorney said he'd try to use the school to build a case." Looks like he wasn't kidding. As Ethan stood to throw away his trash, he caught a glimpse of something that stopped him cold. Outside the cafeteria windows, a black car was parked on the street, not the sub from before. A different one, but just as dark, just as sleek, just as out of place. Ethan stared at it until Lucas tugged his sleeve. "Come on, man. Don't let them know they were getting to you." But they were getting to him. Whitmore was tightening the net, not by direct attack, but by making Ethan's life so observed and scrutinized that one misstep, one bad day, one moment of frustration could be twisted into evidence. The school day ended with Ethan being handed a note from the office. "Your presence has been requested for a follow-up meeting later this week." Another valuation, another manufactured concern, another round of scrutiny disguised as care. As Ethan left the school, he spotted Tums waiting at the corner, leaning on his cane. The moment Tums saw Ethan's expression, his own hardened. "He's pushing harder," Tums said, "faster than I expected." Ethan nodded, gripping his backpack. "I feel like I'm being hunted." Tums put a steady hand on his shoulder. "Not hunted," he said. "Targeted," he paused before adding, "but targets can fight back too." And Ethan knew then Whitmore had begun a war. One fought not with fists or threats, but with whispers, paperwork, and power. And if Ethan wanted to protect his home, his grandmother, and the legacy Gabriel left him, he would have to learn how to navigate the battlefield Whitmore had just dragged him onto. The days that followed moved like an approaching storm, slow, heavy, and filled with growing pressure that made it hard for Ethan to breathe normally. After school, instead of the usual routine of homework and chores, he returned to a living room stacked with files, envelopes, legal forms, and checklists that Tums or attorney Lennox had insisted were necessary. Their small apartment had become a temporary war room. Papers covered the coffee table. A whiteboard Tums dragged in from a thrift store leaned against the wall, listing deadlines, court dates, and tasks they needed to complete. It felt unreal, like the life of someone older, someone with a suit and a briefcase. Not a 12-year-old trying to survive 7th grade. One evening, Tums appeared with a box stuffed full of legal pads and folders. He set it heavily on the table and rubbed his back. "All right," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Tonight we get organized. If Whitmore wants to use bureaucracy against us, then we'll bury him in proof that this home is stable and loving." Grandma Rose poured him a cup of tea, her hands steadier than they had been earlier that day. "We're not letting that man twist a single thing," she said firmly. "My boy isn't going anywhere." Ethan felt warmth stir in his chest. Her confidence helped, though the knot of worry still pulsed beneath it. They began sorting through years of paperwork, medical visits, school records, receipts, photos of the house before the roof leak last winter. Even certificates Ethan had forgotten he'd earned in elementary school. Tums arranged everything carefully, labeling each folder with precise handwriting. "Judges love order," he said. "If we show them organization, we show them stability." Rose's brow furrowed slightly. "I wish stability didn't take this much paper." Tums chuckled. "You and me both." After an hour of sorting, Rose stood and looked around the apartment. The worn carpet, the squeaky cabinet hinges, the too small dining table, it all suddenly felt inadequate under the scrutiny she imagined looming over them. "Maybe we need to fix things up," she muttered. "That loose tile in the bathroom, the draft under Ethan's window." Ethan winced. "Grandma, you don't have to panic." "I'm not panicking," she said, hands on hips. "I'm preparing. There's a difference." She wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, the apartment transformed into a project site. Tums brought over tools. Ethan helped patch cracks in the wall with borrowed supplies. A neighbor from upstairs fixed the cabinet hinges for free after Rose explained they had a very rude man threatening their home. Even Mrs. DeGato next door donated a thick rug to cover the carpet stain near the hallway. "For good energy," she said, patting Ethan's cheek. Each improvement made the home feel sturdier, less vulnerable, though they all knew it was the paperwork and the truth, not the repairs, that mattered most. But Whitmore did not sit idle. The first sign came in the form of a thick envelope slipped under their door. Rose picked it up with a frown, flipping it over to reveal a gold-lettered law firm logo Ethan didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted. Inside were formal documents full of legal jargon, statements demanding verification of guardianship, confirmation of household stability, and assessment of minors' capability to manage inherited assets. The tone was polite, almost gentle, but the intent was obvious: intimidation. Tums arrived minutes later, having received an identical email. He read the papers with tight lips. "Whitmore is accelerating," he muttered. He wants to overwhelm us. Rose crossed her arms. He'll need to try harder. Ethan wasn't so sure. The documents made his skin crawl. He couldn't shake the sense that every step Whitmore took was part of a plan he'd rehearsed many times against many people who never stood a chance. But Ethan wasn't alone. He repeated that to himself whenever fear threatened to seep through. Then came the second sign. A reporter showed up outside the apartment building, coat too expensive for their neighborhood, smile too sharp. She called out to them as they returned from groceries. "Ethan Miller," she asked brightly, "is it true you re-involved in a corporate inheritance dispute? How does it feel to hold power over Progress Industries?" Rose stepped protectively in front of Ethan. "Back off," she snapped. "He's a child. Go write about potholes or something useful." The reporter didn't flinch. "Ma'am, the public deserves to understand." Tums appeared behind them, blocking the camera with his body. "Leave now," he growled, "or I'll file a harassment complaint." The woman backed away, but not before snapping several photos. Ethan's heart hammered. What if those pictures ended up online, on TV? What if his classmates saw? That night, Tums called Lennox, who seemed unsurprised. "Whitmore likely tipped off the press," the attorney said. "He's trying to shape public perception before the hearing. But don't worry, we'll counter it with a statement when the time comes." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't feel reassured. He felt exposed. School wasn't any easier. Rumors grew louder. A few kids asked him if he was buying a mansion. Some joked about being his bodyguards. One boy sneered that Ethan was acting too important now. Even teachers didn't hide their nervousness. They watched him the way people watch a puzzle that might explode. Every time he walked into the office, he felt the tension rise. The CP's interviewer returned twice, both times asking increasingly pointed questions. "Does your grandmother ever forget things? Do you ever feel unsafe? Is anyone coaching you on what to say?" Ethan kept repeating the truth, but each question felt like a net being tightened. One afternoon, after a grueling set of questions, he stepped outside for air and noticed two men in suits sitting in a parked car across from the school. They weren't reading, eating, or talking. They were watching, not covertly, blatantly. Ethan's breath hitched. He recognized the way they held themselves, rigid and ready, the same type of men he'd seen in Whitmore's orbit. He turned back inside, pulse racing. That evening, as Ethan hunched over the dining table reviewing more documents, Rose placed a warm hand on his back. "You redoing great, sweetheart," she said. Her voice carried quiet strength. "Your grandfather would be proud." Ethan nodded but didn't look up. "I'm trying. Trying is enough," she whispered. Tums arrived shortly after with updates. "Lennox secured an emergency protective motion," he announced. "This prevents any external parties from contacting CPs without documented cause." Ethan exhaled. "So Whitmore has to stop." "He has to slow down," Tums corrected. "But he won't stop. He's already pushing for an emergency board meeting next month. He plans to challenge your voting rights in front of the directors." Ethan's head snapped up. "In front of them?" "Yes," Tums said, "and he'll try to paint you as unprepared, vulnerable. A child who doesn't deserve a seat at the table." Ethan swallowed. "What do I do?" Tums placed a hand on his shoulder. "You prepare harder. You learn everything you can. You walk in there standing tall. And you show him that Gabriel Miller's grandson is not someone he can bully." Rose nodded fiercely. "We were behind you, sweetheart, every step." Ethan looked at them, these two people holding up his world, and felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, but now it sat beside determination. He might not have asked for this fight, but he wouldn't back down from it. Tomorrow they would continue preparing. Tomorrow they would repair, organize, study, plan. Tomorrow he would inch closer to facing the man who wanted to dismantle everything his grandfather left him. Tomorrow the war would get louder, and Ethan would be ready for it. By the end of the week, the tension around Ethan's life felt like a constant static hum, always there, always buzzing, always pressing against the edges of his thoughts. Between the mounting school pressure, the legal preparations, and the unrelenting sense that Whitmore's people were watching from every corner, Ethan felt stretched thin. But one thing Lennox had told him echoed through every uneasy moment: your grandfather left you allies. Ethan hadn't known what that meant. Gabriel Miller had been a simple man, or so Ethan had always believed. A man who built houses, worked overtime shifts, and came home smelling of fresh lumber. But every day since the revelation at the bank, Ethan discovered another layer of the grandfather he never really knew, and each new piece made him realize Gabriel's life had been far more complicated and far more powerful than anyone imagined. That truth arrived on a cold Thursday afternoon when a sleek silver sedan pulled up outside the apartment building just as Ethan rose, and Tums were reviewing court documents. The car engine cut off smoothly, and a tall man stepped out, a man in a charcoal overcoat, wearing confidence the way some people wore cologne. His posture was straight, his steps purposeful, and though he looked like someone who belonged in a corner office on the 40th floor of a high rise, His gaze carried warmth rather than arrogance. Thomas looked through the window and nearly dropped his pen. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "That's Richard Navarro." Ethan blinked. "Who, CEO of Progress Industries?" Thomas said. "Not the public face, that's Whitmore. Navarro runs the real machinery." Rose's eyes widened. "What is he doing here?" "Coming to repay a debt," Thomas answered quietly. A loud knock followed. Ethan's stomach tightened with nerves, but Thomas gave him a reassuring nod before opening the door. Standing in the hallway was Richard Navarro, the kind of man magazines described as a visionary leader or one of the most influential minds in American infrastructure. But right now he wasn't flanked by reporters or board members. He was alone, and he smiled warmly as he extended a hand. "You must be Ethan," Navarro said. His voice carried strength without intimidation, confidence without cruelty. Ethan shook his hand cautiously. Yes, sir." Navarro turned to Rose, bowing his head respectfully. "Mrs. Miller, I've wanted to meet you for a long time." Rose blinked in surprise. "Me? Why would a man like you want anything to do with me?" Navarro smiled gently. "Because your husband changed the course of my life." Rose's breath caught. "Gabriel?" "Yes," Navarro said. "I would not be where I am today without him." He stepped inside at Thomas's invitation and removed his coat, revealing a crisp suit beneath. But despite the elegance, he moved through the apartment without judgment. His eyes took in the patchwork repairs, the aging furniture, the whiteboard filled with legal notes. Instead of pity or condescension, he regarded everything with quiet respect. Ethan sat opposite him at the table, unsure how to begin. Navarro helped. "I imagine you've had a difficult week," he said kindly. "Whitmore is not known for being gentle." Ethan let out a weak laugh. "You could say that." Navarro folded his hands. "Which is why I'm here." Gabriel was a private man, but he left a legacy in places you've never seen. He helped people quietly, without asking for recognition. And when he believed in someone, he believed completely. Rose leaned forward, curiosity etched deeply into her features. "What did Gabriel do for you?" Navarro took a breath. 20 years ago, before I ever sat on a boardroom, I ran a small construction firm. We were decent but young, underfunded, and competing with companies 3 times our size. One winter, we hit a financial disaster. A project stalled, investors backed out, and we were on the brink of shutting down." He paused, remembering. "Your husband stepped in at a moment when no one else would. He offered to invest not much, but enough to keep us alive. More importantly, he offered advice. He told me where to cut corners and where I absolutely should not. He told me how to treat my workers. He even spent weekends helping on sites just so we could meet deadlines." Ethan stared. "Grandpa did all that?" Navarro nodded. "And he asked for nothing in return, not fame, not credit. Just fair treatment and long-term shares, not for profit, but because he believed the company could grow into something meaningful." Navarro's expression tightened with sincerity, and he was right. Progress Industries exists today because your grandfather saved the foundation long before Whitmore ever stepped into a boardroom. Rose wiped a tear from her cheek. Ethan felt his chest swell with pride and grief all at once. "Why didn't he tell us?" Ethan asked softly. Navarro smiled gently. "He didn't want to burden you with the politics or the weight of business. He believed in earning your place through character, not wealth." He glanced at Ethan. "And he was right to trust you. But now that trust puts you in the crosshairs of someone who wants full control." Thomas nodded grimly. "Whitmore's pulling strings everywhere. Cease Media School Board. He's trying to weaken Ethan before the vote." Navarro's expression hardened. "Whitmore thinks this is just a matter of time. He believes you will panic sell or make a mistake that disqualifies you." He turned to Ethan, eyes steady. "I am here to make sure that does not happen." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Why help me? You don't owe me anything." Navarro shook his head. "I owe your grandfather everything. And helping you is honoring him." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "These are internal reports from Progress Industries. Emails, vote tallies, board strategies. They show Whitmore's intentions clearly. With your grandfather gone, he planned to orchestrate a takeover." Thomas nodded as he skimmed the pages. "This will demolish his credibility in court." Navarro added, "I'm also willing to testify about Gabriel, about his contributions, and about Whitmore's history of manipulating the board." Ethan felt a wave of disbelief. A CEO, one of the most powerful men in Chicago, was offering to stand beside him. Rose touched Ethan's shoulder. "Your grandfather truly left you protected. Not by money," Navarro said. "By people. Good people." Ethan met Navarro's gaze. "Mr. Navarro, I don't know anything about board meetings or shareholders. I don't even understand half the words in those documents." Navarro nodded. "You will learn, and I will help you." He paused. "But you must be prepared. Whitmore is relentless. He will attempt to intimidate you directly. He may even try to smear your grandfather's name. You must stay steady no matter what." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "I will do whatever it takes." Navarro smiled. "That's exactly why Gabriel believed you could handle this." Before leaving, Navarro placed a card beside Ethan. "Call me anytime, day or night. You are not fighting this alone. Then he shook Rose's hand gently, nodded to Thomas, and stepped out into the cold evening. As the door closed, Ethan felt something shift deep inside him. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt anchored not by fear, but by the legacy Gabriel left behind, not just wealth. Not just shares, but people loyalty, honor, strength. Whitmore might have power, but Gabriel had something stronger, a network of lives he'd touched. And now, those lives were standing up for his grandson. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready to begin. The morning after Navarro's visit felt different, charged with a sense of urgency that neither Ethan nor Rose could escape. Even the air inside the apartment carried an edge, as though the walls themselves understood that something far larger than their small home was beginning to unfold. When Navarro had spoken of Whitmore's intentions, he hadn't exaggerated. Within hours, Thomas received a formal notification Progress Industries would be holding an emergency shareholder meeting in less than 2 weeks. The agenda was deceptively simple: review and update corporate welfare clauses, but Navarro's voice carried the weight of what it meant. Whitmore is targeting the 30% worker benefit clause, Navarro had said the night before, spreading documents across the table. Your grandfather fought for that clause. He protected it for years. Without it, thousands of employees lose healthcare, paid overtime protections, tuition support for their kids, even basic hazard pay. Ethan had felt anger sting behind his ribs. He wants to make the company richer by cutting everything that helps the workers. Navarro didn't hesitate. Exactly, it has been his goal for years, and with Gabriel gone, he finally thinks he can force a vote. Now, in the cold morning light, Ethan's hands shook slightly as he reread the meeting notice for the 10th time. The words felt unreal: corporate board meeting, shareholder vote, proposed amendments. He was a kid who didn't even know how to file his own taxes. How was he supposed to walk into a room full of executives and protect something his grandfather had fought for decades? Thomas entered the kitchen carrying a new stack of folders, looking like he hadn't slept much. All right, he said, clearing his throat. We have exactly 12 days to prepare Ethan to stand in front of the board of Progress Industries. That means learning what the clause does, understanding the financial arguments Whitmore will use, and memorizing Gabriel's original reasoning. He handed Ethan a binder thicker than any textbook the boy had ever held. This, Thomas explained, is everything your grandfather wrote, submitted, debated, or voted for during his time as a silent investor. Ethan flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. There were letters, handwritten drafts, meeting notes, margin scribbles, economic projections, union correspondence. His grandfather had been far more involved than anyone had known. Each page showed a man with conviction, a man who cared about the workers more than profit margins. It didn't feel like reading corporate history, it felt like reading Gabriel's heart. Rose watched from the kitchen counter, her expression mixed with pride and worry. Gabriel worked himself to the bone, she whispered. I never understood why he stayed up so late writing. Now I see. Ethan swallowed. He believed in them. Rose nodded. And now they need you to believe in them too. By noon, Navarro joined them through video call, his face appearing on Thomas's old laptop. He looked sharp despite the early hour, radiating the same calm authority he had shown the night before. Good morning, Navarro greeted, offering Ethan a small reassuring smile. I trust you've started reviewing your grandfather's materials. Ethan held up the binder. It's a lot. It is, Navarro agreed. But you won't be alone during the meeting. I'll be there, so will 2 other board members who respected Gabriel deeply. What matters is that you show the board you understand why your grandfather made the decisions he did. Thomas leaned into the camera's frame. What tactics will Whitmore use? Navarro exhaled. He'll argue that the clause limits company growth, that shareholders lose potential earnings because so much revenue goes into worker programs. He'll present graphs, projections, probably exaggerated forecasts designed to create panic. Ethan frowned. What do I say to that? You remind them, Navarro replied, that Progress Industries was built on the backs of those workers. That Gabriel's clause created loyalty, reduced turnover, improved productivity, and protected the company from lawsuits and accidents. The clause didn't weaken the company, it made it stronger. Rose smiled proudly. Sounds like something Gabriel would say. Navarro nodded. He did say it, many times. Over the next several days, Ethan trained harder than he ever had for anything in his life. He practiced reading financial reports with Thomas until late hours of the night. He highlighted sections in the binder, writing notes in the margins the way his grandfather had. He repeated lines in the bathroom mirror, learning how to speak with confidence even when he didn't feel it. Navarro coached him on video calls how to sit, how to project his voice, how to respond to Whitmore without showing fear. One evening, Navarro said something that stayed with Ethan long after the call ended. When you enter that boardroom, Whitmore will try to treat you like a child. He will try to minimize you. Your job is to stay rooted. Because the moment he sees hesitation, he'll use it to push his agenda. Ethan nodded slowly. So I have to act older than I am? No, Navarro corrected softly. You have to act like Gabriel. And Gabriel didn't care who tried to intimidate him. He only cared about what was right. But even as Ethan prepared, Whitmore increased the pressure. News articles began appearing online, anonymous sources claiming Progress Industries was being destabilized by a minor shareholder. Reports questioning whether a child should have voting power, social media threads twisted into rumors about Ethan's home life. Teachers treated him like a fragile glass object, while students looked at him like a walking headline. He wanted to disappear, but disappearing wasn't an option anymore. Late one night, after hours of practicing his speech, Ethan sank into the couch with exhaustion. I'm scared, he whispered. What if I freeze? What if he wins? Rose sat beside him, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. Your grandfather faced battles scarier than boardrooms, she said softly. But he faced them because he believed in something. You believe too, don't you? Ethan nodded. I do. Then that's all you need. Thomas joined them with 2 mugs of cocoa, sitting heavily in the armchair. You remind me of Gabriel, he said. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. But when he spoke, people listened. Not because he had money, but because he had truth. Ethan looked down at his hands. Can truth stand against someone like Whitmore? Thomas nodded. Only if you were brave enough to hold it in front of him. The countdown continued. The binder grew full of sticky notes, highlighted lines, and handwritten comments. Ethan rehearsed day after day until he could recite parts of Gabriel's reasoning without even glancing at the page. And every night Navarro checked in, offering new insights or strategies. When the 12th day finally arrived, Ethan stood in front of the mirror wearing the navy blue blazer Rose had bought from a thrift store and tailored with careful stitches. His hair was combed, his posture straight, his eyes steady. He didn't feel like a CEO. He didn't feel like a millionaire. He felt like a boy trying to honor a man he'd lost long ago. But when he looked at his reflection, he saw something new in himself, something that hadn't been there before. He saw Gabriel's resolve. The car arrived to take them to the meeting. Rose squeezed his hand. Tom stood proudly beside him. Navarro waited at headquarters. And Ethan stepped forward, ready to face the boardroom Whitmore thought would crush him. The boardroom of Progress Industries did not resemble anything Ethan had ever seen. It occupied the top floor of the headquarters, wrapped in glass walls overlooking the Chicago skyline. The table was long, carved from dark walnut, polished so smoothly it reflected the ceiling lights. Chairs upholstered in deep gray leather lined each side like thrones belonging to kings of industry. This was not just a meeting room, this was a battlefield dressed in corporate elegance. Ethan stepped inside with Navarro at his left and Thomas at his right. Rose waited outside per company policy, though she'd given Ethan a hug so tight he could still feel it around his ribs. Executives seated around the table watched him with a mix of curiosity, caution, and skepticism. Some whispered quietly, others folded their hands and waited with unreadable expressions. Ethan felt their stares press against him, measuring him, trying to decide whether he was a threat, a joke, or merely a temporary inconvenience. Then the door opened again. Henry Whitmore entered wearing a navy suit sharp enough to cut steel. He walked with deliberate confidence, nodding as board members greeted him. The room seemed to shift around him as though accustomed to his presence. He reached his seat at the far end of the table opposite Navarro's and glanced at Ethan with a look that carried challenge rather than greeting. Shall we begin? Whitmore said smoothly. The board chairwoman, Ms. Eleanor Bishop, an older woman with white hair pulled into a poised bun, nodded. This emergency meeting has been called in accordance with shareholder protocol. Today we will address proposed amendments to the Worker Benefits Clause. She glanced at the papers before her. Additionally, due to the recent activation of inherited shares, we acknowledge the presence of Ethan Gabriel Miller, beneficiary of the Miller Family Trust. A murmur rippled through the room at the official acknowledgement. Ethan felt his pulse quicken but stood straighter. Bishop continued, before any vote, both primary shareholders, Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Miller, will have an opportunity to present statements. She gestured toward Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, you requested this meeting. You may begin. Whitmore rose with well-practiced confidence and approached the digital display. Thank you, Madam Chair, he said calmly. He tapped a button and graphs appeared behind him, profit margins, projected growth curves, multicolored charts that made Ethan's head spin even though he had studied similar ones with Navarro. For years, Whitmore began, Progress Industries has carried an unnecessary burden, the 30% worker benefits clause introduced by the late Gabriel Miller. Some board members shifted, knowing where this was going. Whitmore continued, while well-intentioned, the clause restricts reinvestment opportunities, limits expansion, and prevents us from remaining competitive in a rapidly evolving market. He clicked again, more graphs, more lines, more numbers designed to impress. Shareholders deserve higher returns. The company deserves freedom to allocate funds where needed most. He turned slightly, eyes grazing Ethan with practiced subtlety. But with the recent shift in voting power, significant decisions now fall to someone lacking experience, education, and comprehension of long-term corporate strategy. He didn't say Ethan's name, he didn't need to, everyone understood. Tum stiffened beside Ethan, Navarro's jaw tightened. Whitmore faced the board again. I hereby propose a vote to remove the worker benefits clause and reallocate those funds into expansion and innovation. This is the path forward, this keeps us strong. He returned to his seat, smug and composed. Chairwoman Bishop nodded. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Now we will hear from the opposing shareholder. Ethan Miller, you may present your statement. All eyes shifted. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze, every expectation, every doubt. His palms were damp, his throat dry, but he remembered Navarro's coaching. He remembered Gabriel's letters. He remembered the workers whose livelihoods depended on this clause. He stepped toward the display. He wasn't tall, he wasn't old, he wasn't powerful. But when he looked at the faces around him, he found courage from a place deeper than fear. Good morning, he began, voice steady despite the rapid beat of his heart. My name is Ethan Miller. I know I'm not what you expect in this room. A few board members exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan continued, but my grandfather believed in this company long before many of us ever sat here. And he believed in the people who built it. He tapped the screen, switching to a different set of files. Navarro prepared documents Gabriel had written in his own hand. These are my grandfather's notes. When he introduced the worker benefits clause, he didn't do it because it was easy. He did it because he knew what it meant for the company's future. Ethan clicked again. Charts appeared, ones Navarro had taught him to read. Since the clause was introduced, worker turnover dropped by 35%, training costs fell, productivity increased, injuries decreased by nearly 40%, and lawsuits, practically non-existent compared to competitors. The board murmured again, this time in mild surprise. Ethan continued, my grandfather didn't just care about workers. He cared about the company, he protected it. And he believed that supporting people was the best investment any corporation could make. He took a breath. Mr. Whitmore says this clause is holding us back. But the numbers show the opposite. Cutting it won't strengthen Progress Industries, it will weaken it. Whitmore's expression twitched for the first time. Ethan pressed on, if we remove the clause, we risk losing the loyalty that makes our workforce strong. We risk losing the safety that prevents legal trouble. We risk losing morale that keeps productivity high. And we risk becoming just another company that values profit more than people. He turned toward Whitmore now, meeting his gaze head on. My grandfather believed a company is only as strong as the people who build it. I believe that too. The room went still, not with quiet but with focus, real focus. Ethan swallowed hard and delivered his final words. I'm young, I'm still learning. But I know that taking care of people isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And I vote to keep the worker benefits clause exactly as it is. He stepped back, heart pounding. Chairwoman Bishop looked impressed, genuinely impressed. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Whitmore, however, leaned forward with a sharp smile. Madam Chair, he said, before we move to a vote, I request the right to question Mr. Miller. Navarro stiffened. Thomas whispered, stay strong. Bishop nodded slowly. You may proceed. Whitmore approached Ethan with the confidence of someone used to winning. Tell me, Ethan, he began, tone dripping with condescension, can you define amortization? Ethan hesitated, not completely. Whitmore smirked. What about ROI forecasting, asset liability modeling, market elasticity? Ethan felt heat rising. Whitmore pressed, you claim to understand this company. Yet you lack basic financial terminology. How can a child be trusted with millions in voting power? Several board members shifted uncomfortably. But Ethan inhaled slowly, remembering Navarro's advice, don't let him pull you onto emotional ground, respond with truth. I'm still learning, Ethan said firmly. But understanding people matters more than knowing every vocabulary word. And I can keep learning. Workers can't keep losing everything. Whitmore opened his mouth to retort, but Bishop raised her hand. Enough. We will proceed to the vote. One by one board members voted. Whitmore glared as votes rolled and several supporting Ethan's stance. Then Navarro voted in favor of Ethan. Then two more followed. Finally it came down to Ethan. He lifted his card against removal. He said, the worker benefits clause remained intact. Whitmore leaned back, mask cracking, fury brewing behind his eyes. Ethan had won but only the first battle. The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor felt unreal. Ethan still felt the tremor in his knees from standing in front of a dozen powerful executives. But he also carried something new, something steady and bright burning beneath his ribs. He had faced Henry Whitmore in open battle and walked away with a victory. A small one, maybe, but one that mattered. The worker benefits clause remained untouched. Gabriel's legacy had survived another day. Navarro clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder the moment the elevator doors slid open. "You did well," he said with a rare softness. "Better than most adults could have." Tums chimed in with a proud grin. "You threw that man off balance." "Haven't seen Whitmore grit his teeth like that in years." Ethan allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. "I thought he was going to tear me apart." "He tried," Navarro replied, "but you didn't break." They stepped into the lobby, where sunlight spilled through tall glass windows, scattering across marble floors. Rose, who had been waiting anxiously in an armchair, rushed toward Ethan the second she spotted him. "Sweetheart?" she asked, clutching his hands. "How did it go?" Ethan nodded. "We won." She let out a shaky breath and hugged him tightly. "Praise the Lord. Gabriel would be so proud of you." Navarro checked his watch, already shifting into work mode. "I'm heading back upstairs. There's damage control to do. Whitmore will regroup fast. Expect pushback." He turned to Ethan. "Stay close to your grandmother, and Tums, call me if anything happens." With that, Navarro disappeared into another elevator, returning to the battlefield he lived in daily. As they exited the building, Ethan felt the crisp Chicago air fill his lungs. For the first time all week, the sky seemed less heavy, the cold less sharp. But the relief didn't last long. Across the street, a man stood near a lamppost, hood pulled low, hands shoved in his coat pockets. He wasn't watching the tower, or the traffic, or the sky. He was watching Ethan. Ethan stiffened. Tums noticed immediately. "You know him?" "No," Ethan whispered. The man's posture didn't match a reporter or a CPS agent. He looked like someone who wanted to stay unseen but needed to be present. Rose frowned. "Let's keep walking." But the closer they came, the clearer it became that the man wasn't just standing there by coincidence. When Ethan stepped off the curb, the stranger pushed off the lamppost and approached, keeping his hands visible, movements slow, careful not to startle. "Ethan Miller?" he asked. Tums stepped between them instantly. "Who's asking?" The man raised his hands slightly. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt anyone." His voice was tired, strained, like someone carrying too many secrets for too many years. He lowered his hood, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and stubble, early 40s maybe, not dangerous, but troubled. "My name's Daniel Ward," he said. "I used to work for Whitmore, and I need to talk to the boy." Tums narrowed his eyes. "If you have something to say, you say it with us present." Ward nodded. "Fine by me. I'm not hiding anything, not anymore." Rose stepped closer protectively. "What do you want with my grandson?" Ward exhaled, his breath forming a ghostly cloud in the cold air. "I saw the board meeting. Word spreads fast in that building. Whitmore's furious, more furious than I've ever seen him. And that means he's going to escalate." Ethan swallowed hard. "We already know he's coming after us." Ward shook his head. "You don't know how far he'll go." He glanced around nervously, as though expecting someone to pull up beside them in a black sedan. "But I worked for him for 9 years, public relations, damage control, image management. My job was to clean up whatever mess he made. Accidents, lawsuits, employee complaints, he let me deal with every ugly thing in the dark where no one could see." Ethan felt a heavy chill slide down his spine. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because Gabriel Miller once helped me," Ward replied, voice tight. "When no one else would, and I didn't get to repay him before he passed." Ethan blinked. "My grandfather helped you?" "Yes," Ward said. 8 years ago, when I was nearly fired and sued for exposing misuse of funds inside the company. Whitmore blamed me for numbers he falsified. I was facing financial ruin. Gabriel stepped in, quietly. He paid for a lawyer, covered my bills, kept me afloat until I landed on my feet again. Rose gasped. "He never told us, he never bragged." Ward said that's who he was. Tums lowered his guard slightly. "So why now? Why come to us?" Ward scanned the street again before lowering his voice. "Because Whitmore isn't only trying to discredit Ethan. He's trying to erase everything your grandfather built. And I have documents, real documents, that can stop him. Files that prove Whitmore diverted company funds, manipulated reports, even threatened internal auditors." Ethan's breath caught. "Why didn't you expose it before?" Ward looked pained. "Because he buried me under Nenda's threats and the fear of losing everything again. I have a family now. Kids. I couldn't risk it." He stepped closer to Ethan. "But when I saw what you did today, kids standing up to him in a room full of sharks, I realized I can't stay quiet anymore." Rose touched her cross necklace. "What kind of documents?" Ward hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. He held it out to Ethan. "These copies of internal memos, emails, financial discrepancies, voice logs, enough to force a federal investigation if filed correctly." Tums's eyes widened. This could dismantle his entire operation. Ward nodded grimly. "Exactly, and that's why you need to keep it safe. Whitmore will do anything to stop this from coming out." Ethan took the flash drive, feeling its weight like a burning coal in his hand. "Why give this to me?" "Because Whitmore can't predict you," Ward said. "He underestimates you. He thinks you read just a child with no power. But today proved him wrong." The stranger stepped back, pulling his hood up again. I can't stay long. If he realizes I'm gone, he'll come looking. Use that wisely, and don't trust anyone from his circle. He began walking away. Wait, Ethan called. Ward paused. What happens now? The man looked him in the eyes. Now, you decide whether to finish the fight your grandfather started. Then he disappeared into the steady flow of Chicago's cold, crowded streets. Ethan looked down at the flash drive in his palm, his heartbeat thudding like it was trying to warn him just how dangerous this path was. But he also felt something else, an echo of Gabriel's strength, a reminder that he wasn't just a kid caught in a battle. He was the heir to a legacy Whitmore had tried for years to crush. Tom's placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. This changes everything. Rose whispered, Lord help us. And Ethan, gripping the drive tightly, knew she was right. Nothing would ever be the same now. The hours after Daniel Ward vanished into the crowded Chicago streets felt like an unsteady dream, one where Ethan held a piece of evidence strong enough to destroy a billionaire, yet had no idea how to protect it. Back inside their apartment, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, the flash drive placed carefully between them like a volatile device. Rose crossed her arms tightly, the anxiety in her expression unmistakable. Thomas leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose, deep in thought. Ethan stared at the flash drive, feeling as if it were pulsing with the weight of 100 consequences. What exactly is on it? Rose asked, her voice wavering. He said documents. Ethan replied, emails, recordings, things Whitmore doesn't want anyone to see. Thomas looked at Ethan sharply. If it's what Ward claims, this could trigger a federal investigation. Fraud, coercion, manipulation of financial data, intimidation tactics. He exhaled slowly, but it also means Whitmore will strike hard and fast. He'll know someone leaked something the moment one of his internal trackers pings. Rose's expression darkened. Then we don't plug the thing into anything connected to the internet. Not yet. Thomas nodded. We study it offline, carefully. But the moment they tried, they realized Ward had encrypted the flash drive. A password screen appeared, demanding a phrase instead of characters. Ethan stared at it with frustration. He didn't tell us the password. Thomas frowned. He couldn't risk saying it in public. Then how are we supposed to read what's on it? Ethan asked. Rose touched his arm gently. Maybe he wants you to meet him again. That idea settled heavily over the table. Ward was already scared for his life. Would he risk another meeting? And even if he did, how would they find him? Chicago was enormous. But before they could plan anything further, a violent knock rattled their front door. Rose jumped. Thomas stood immediately. Ethan's heart thudded against his ribs. Who is it? Rose called. A voice answered, calm, official, and professional. Chicago Department of Child and Family Services. We need to follow up on a report filed this afternoon. Ethan's stomach twisted. Whitmore had launched another strike. Thomas moved toward the door and cracked it open just enough to speak through. Two agents stood outside holding clipboards, different faces from the previous day, dressed in crisp coats that gave them an air of authority. Good evening, the first agent said. We received new information regarding the stability of this household. We were required to perform a wellness visit. Rose looked panicked, but Thomas kept his voice steady. We have an attorney who instructed us to decline all informal visits. You need an appointment confirmed through legal channels. The agent's smile didn't reach her eyes. Green, refusing a wellness check can be interpreted as non-cooperation. So can harassment, Thomas countered. We will not be bullied. File the request properly. For a moment, everyone held their breath. The two agents exchanged glances, calculating, frustrated before the first one responded, We'll return with authorization. They walked away, but the message was clear. Whitmore was escalating. As soon as the door closed, Rose's composure cracked. They were going to take my grandson away, she whispered, trembling. Ethan moved to her immediately. Grandma, no one is taking me anywhere. She cupped his face with shaking hands. He's powerful, Ethan. He has reach, he has money, and he has no conscience. Thomas placed a firm hand on her shoulder. He's powerful, yes. But he's desperate now. Desperation leads to mistakes. We have leverage he doesn't know we're holding. He gestured to the flash drive. Ethan stared at it again. Then we need Ward. We need to know what's inside this before Whitmore makes his next move. Thomas nodded, agreed. Ward won't contact us again. Too risky, which means we need to find him. Ethan frowned. He said Whitmore would come looking if he realized he was gone. Where would Ward hide? Thomas thought for a moment. Someone like him, someone who's lived years in fear. He'll go somewhere predictable to him but unpredictable to others. A place he associates with safety. Rose looked up. He mentioned he has a family. Ethan blinked. Then we start there. Thomas winced. We need to be careful. Approaching his family without warning could put them at risk. And if Whitmore has people watching their home, showing up could compromise Ward entirely. Ethan sank back into his chair. So what do we do? Thomas glanced at him. Think, Ethan. Ward chose you to hold this. Why? Ethan swallowed. Because my grandfather helped him. Yes, Tom said, but also because he believes you re unpredictable to a man like Whitmore. You re not in his system. You don't operate by his rules. Ethan thought hard and then it hit him. He remembered Ward's face when he spoke about Gabriel. There had been something in his voice. Something emotional, something nostalgic. He talked about a place, Ethan murmured. Somewhere my grandfather helped him. A meeting point. He said he almost lost everything. Maybe Grandpa met him somewhere important then. Rose perked up slightly. Ethan, your grandfather helped dozens of men around the city. Construction sites, job centers, community buildings. Tom snapped his fingers. Community centers. The South Ridge Labor Support Center. Gabriel volunteered there for years. Ethan's pulse quickened. Ward would feel safe there. But before they could even stand to plan their next move, Ethan's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out and froze. An unknown number had sent a single text. If you want the truth, come alone. South Ridge Center, midnight, DU. Rose grabbed his wrist. Absolutely not. You are not going anywhere alone at midnight. Thomas frowned. This might be our only chance. Ward will only come out in the dark, away from prying eyes. Then I will go, Rose said fiercely. No, Thomas argued. If Whitmore suspects anything, he'll be waiting for an adult. But Ethan is the only one Whitmore underestimates. Rose's panic turned to fury. He is a boy. Thomas placed a gentle but resolute hand on her arm. He's also the only person Ward trusts enough to contact. Ethan took a deep breath. Grandma, Thomas is right. I have to go. She shook her head violently, tears forming. Ethan, please, I'll go with him. Thomas promised. He won't be alone. Rose's eyes moved between the two of them, fear and pride warring inside her. Finally, she whispered, come back to me, both of you. As midnight approached, the city seemed to pulse with danger. Ethan pulled on a coat and tucked the flash drive into his pocket, its weight reminding him of everything at stake. Thomas waited by the door, cane in hand. You ready? He asked. No, Ethan answered honestly, but I'm going anyway. They stepped into the cold Chicago night, heading toward the place where truth waited in the dark. And whoever waited there might hold the key to ending Whitmore's empire or starting a war Ethan wasn't prepared for. But he went anyway, because some battles didn't wait for adults. Some battles chose their warriors long before they felt ready. And tonight, Ethan Miller was walking straight into one. At its core, Ethan's story is not about wealth, power, or corporate battles, though those elements shape the world around him. The real lesson lies in understanding what it means to inherit something larger than money, responsibility, courage, and the weight of another person's hopes. Ethan begins as a boy who simply wants to check his bank balance, and instead discovers that he is the guardian of a legacy forged through decades of quiet sacrifice. Many people believe power is something you chase, but Ethan learns that the truest form of power is something entrusted to you, something that forces you to rise beyond your age, your fear, and your perceived limits. His grandfather did not leave him wealth to make him comfortable. He left him the opportunity to protect thousands of workers, families, and futures. The lesson is that destiny sometimes chooses the unlikely, and when it does, we learn who we truly are by stepping toward responsibility instead of away from it. Another profound lesson comes from the contrast between Gabriel Miller and Henry Whitmore. Gabriel built influence through compassion. Whitmore built it through intimidation. Their approaches reveal two opposing philosophies of leadership, the belief that people are assets to be protected versus the belief that people are obstacles to be exploited. Gabriel used his influence to lift others, to ensure that the company he secretly helped shape would stand on a foundation of fairness. Whitmore, in contrast, clawed for control by removing safeguards, shrinking worker benefits, and silencing anyone who questioned him. The story teaches that leadership without humanity becomes corruption, and power without accountability becomes cruelty. Ethan eventually learns that true strength lies not in domination but in protecting those who cannot stand in the boardroom themselves. The world often rewards the Whitmores loud, wealthy, ruthless, but it depends on the quiet, steadfast Gabriels to keep its heart intact. There is also a lesson in the way allies emerge around Ethan. When his life becomes entangled with corporate warfare, he discovers that his grandfather touched countless lives not through grand gestures, but through small, meaningful acts of integrity. These people come forward to help Ethan not because they fear Whitmore, but because they remember Gabriel's kindness. Richard Navarro, Daniel Ward, and others rise to defend Ethan out of loyalty that Gabriel earned by being decent when no one else was. It shows that the most enduring legacy we leave behind is not financial but relational. Money fades, power shifts, but a reputation for kindness, for fairness, and moral conviction echoes long after someone is gone. Ethan realizes that he isn't fighting Whitmore alone, and he is carried by an army of lives his grandfather once lifted. The lesson is simple but powerful. You never know when the good you do will return to protect those you love. The story also underscores the courage it takes to be young in a world built by adults. Ethan enters a corporate boardroom filled with executives twice or three times his age, all expecting him to fail. Many assume his youth disqualifies him from having a voice, but courage is not measured in years. Ethan proves that conviction can outweigh experience, that truth can stand firm even in rooms designed to intimidate. He learns that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. This is a reminder for anyone young or old that bravery often looks like standing up, shaking, knowing you may be mocked or underestimated, and speaking anyway. When Ethan defends the worker benefits clause, he isn't just presenting an argument, he is becoming the version of himself his grandfather believed he could be. The lesson here is timeless. Do not let others tell you you're too young, too inexperienced, or too small to influence the world. Another striking lesson is about the danger of unchecked ambition. Whitmore keeps escalating, reaching into schools, government systems, and the media, manipulating every lever he can touch. His obsession with control blinds him to consequences. He tries to twist public narratives, pressure the peace system, intimidate witnesses, and dismantle safety nets that workers rely on. His ambition becomes a destructive force not just to Ethan, but to the company itself. The lesson is clear: ambition without ethics eventually consumes everything around it, including the one who wields it. In contrast, Ethan's motivation is the opposite. He isn't fighting for personal gain, but for justice. Ambition that serves others builds communities. Ambition that serves only oneself destroys them. Finally, the greatest lesson in Ethan's journey is about legacy, not the kind written in documents, but the kind etched into character. Gabriel didn't leave Ethan wealth to turn him into a millionaire. He left him a responsibility that would make him grow. It forces Ethan to learn who he is, what he stands for, and what kind of person he intends to become. Legacy is not about what you accumulate, but about what you uphold. Ethan could have sold his shares, bowed under Whitmore's pressure, or retreated into safety. Instead, he chooses to honor the values his grandfather lived by: protect the vulnerable, stand firm against injustice, and use whatever power you possess to safeguard the people who depend on you. Even though he is still a child, Ethan learns that the courage to defend what is right defines him more than any inheritance ever could. In the end, the story teaches that goodness is not loud, cruelty is not invincible, and even the smallest voice can tilt the balance of a world shaped by giants. Ethan's journey reminds us that strength is not found in intimidation or wealth, but in conviction, empathy, and the quiet determination to protect others even when standing against forces far bigger than ourselves. The true victory is not the one that happens in the boardroom. It is the victory of character over fear, integrity over greed, and love over power. And that, above all, is the lesson Ethan carries into the future. The world is shaped not by those who seek control, but by those who have the courage to do what is right. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.